Well, gang, welcome to another episode of CISO Talk. If you're hearing thunder outside, it's because it's the South and we're getting an electric show outside. So I apologize. I've tried to contain the sound as much as possible. It's not sound effect noise to today's podcast, although we will be sharing a bunch of lightning and thunder with Arvind Raman, who will be joining me here in just a few moments. But before we do that, if this is your first time tuning into the CISO Talk podcast, please make sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every single day, we post new content right here on YouTube. And if you're not subscribed to our CyberHub CyberHub podcast channel on your favorite podcast listening platform, please make sure to do so. Now, without further ado, let's get right into today's lightning show because we've got one outside, but I guarantee you there's going to be one right here today on this episode. CISO Talk time. Here we go, folks.
From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Arvind, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, folks. Arvind Raman is the CISO over at Mitel, and you're a veteran of our industry.
I am. I know quite a bit of experience, about 20 years in the industry, and it's almost right down the middle, split between the product development, product ownership space, and then in the CISO organization for the last 10 years or so.
See, yeah. And it's always fun to talk to people who've started on the product side and then shifted to the security side, right? Because it's a different thought process when you look at security. So if you don't mind, as you talk about your 20 years, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit more detail of how those 20 years spanned and kind of the progression of your career to hold the esteemed title of CISO?
Absolutely. I started off as a product R&D, had always been in the security side of things. So security touched to my products, right? My first, I would say 4 or 5 years of a career focused on biometric security products, like essentially the voice authentication products.
Uh-huh.
And then from then on, I moved on to hardware-based product development. I've been in the R&D again. And then that was another 4 or 5 years or so. Then I shifted over to CISO side of things in a small organization. I guess it's not a small organization, but medium-sized organization in Atlantic Canada, named JD Irving, and they were a private organization, but about 15,000 employees. So I would say that's a pretty good size organization. And that's the first time I kind of played the quasi-CISO. They didn't have an information security program. I tried to help them set one up. And then from there on, I moved on to the big banks in the Toronto area. And about 4 years, I worked in CIBC, and then a couple of years in Scotiabank, before this opportunity came by where I said, okay, I'll use all my experience from a development side, from a product side, and then from a security/CISO side to put together my first CISO in Mitel.
I love that background because, I've been doing the show. I think you're episode 125, if I'm not mistaken. So 125 of our peers, Arvind, right? And not one story is the same. One, if I interviewed 100 lawyers and I said, how did you become a lawyer? I went to law school, passed the bar, became a lawyer. If I interview 100 doctors, how'd you become a doctor? I went to medical school, did my internship, became a doctor. CFOs, what'd you do? I went to college, became a finance, worked in accounting, became a CFO after I got my MBA. Right? Is that fair? But in security, that's not the case. Everyone's got a different background. So I'm excited for you to share a little bit about that, because what I really want to start to talk about is leadership, right? And, the CISO role today is very much articulated in the fact that we're now business enablers and business leaders. We're no longer a siloed IT function, right? Kind of where we were maybe 5 years ago. When you look at skills and qualities as you're trying to build your team or you're looking to expand and hire more people, what are some of those intangible skills and qualities you look for?
Yeah, I think you hit it right? CISOs this day and age have to be business enablers and business partners. And that's something that, that's still a bit of a struggle in the industry, right? Big organization especially, and I've been in a few of big organizations where it's been too siloed. So when I came here to Mitel and I built my team literally from ground up, like there was a small team, but the structure wasn't there. So I took my time the first 3 months to analyze the organization. And Mitel is a pretty global organization, about 4,000 employees or so. So we had a good sized team from an organization perspective, but security team was small, so I was trying to build it. And what I wanted to do was set the foundation right and get the right foundation in place and get the right leaders for the foundation. And for me, what that means is somebody who can manage the relationships, technical skills, balance the security skills, and then the delivery skills, and who can actually be enablers for the business instead of saying no, right? Security is I guess famous for saying no in the past, right? And I think that's where we've been deemed as a police, but not being seen as an enabler. Similar to how the CIOs are being looked at for the organizations as being enablers, I think the CISO organization have to get to that place where we are enabling the business to do what they need to do, but securely. And we do need to have that reputation built up so that when we need to say no, we can say no, but it can't be all the time.
Yeah, that's so true. We look at the leadership of a CISO and the ability to say, oftentimes the questions that we deal with as CISOs don't really come to you and me, right? It could be someone in DevOps talking to someone in DevSecOps. So what kind of culture do you train within your team to switch them from saying no right away to, sure, but, or yes, we can do it, but what was some of the tricks? What are some of the things you look for? And how did you get that planted down to security culture and the team itself?
Yeah, so I start off with everything in life, is risk-based. Risk management is the top of things, right? Anything we do, whether it comes to real life today with COVID, how we live with it, right? It's all about risk management. And same thing goes to the business decisions. If we need to, embed security in what they need to do, it's all about risk-based, right? We have to be able to have a risk management framework in place in the organization. And the CISO organization should be able to follow that risk management framework to analyze and inform and educate the business folks on saying like, oh, by the way, you want to do this? Here is the risk that we've come up with based on what we know about this environment and what you want to do. By the way, and then you have to categorize them in saying like from very high to very low, whatever the risk is, the 5 levels of the model. And then you basically advise them accordingly. And in the mantra that I follow in my organization and learn on my experiences, if you categorize them from very high to very low in 5 levels, very high, medium, low, and very low, when you are in the high and very high zone, you try to mitigate the risk. When you're in the medium zone, you manage, and when you're low and very low, you accept and monitor to make sure it doesn't creep up on you. So that's what my team is following from a business perspective to make sure that they understand. And it's a cultural change. People are not used to it, right? Looking at it from that perspective. Traditionally, the challenge has been also, security is an IT thing. Well, it's not an IT thing anymore, right? It's an organization-wide. So I'm big in enforcing that in one way that in our signatures, for example, we say like cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Right? It's not just my responsibility as a CISO, because we don't have enough security professionals in the world to deal with the problems that we have in this day and age.
Yeah, it's to me, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility is kind of a mantra that we all live by. But there's beyond that mantra, you brought up some really great examples of, looking at the risk register and trying to evaluate risk as it kind of continues throughout the business process. And I think there's an aspect of the business process that's a bit more challenging, right? And it's the idea of how do I streamline security into the business? So it's not just the risk aspect of it. It's also how do I, you come from the product and the R&D side. So, this might be right up your alley, because I think for a lot of CISOs who don't have that background, the idea of baked in security seems very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. How do you see baked in security, of starting from not here's a product, secure it, but here's what we want to do. How do we embed security throughout the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I have, kind of worked with my team to come up with, kind of 6 building blocks, right? The product security or security from my perspective, from R&D and product development, perspective is you start at the leftmost possible where it's conceptual stage, right? Idea/concept. You start there and you have to follow through from their perspective. From the idea becomes a design, the design becomes implementation, and implementation follows by post-implementation activities. So when you think about idea/design or concept, what you think of is how do I embed my security requirements at that phase so that people start thinking about security, and the product-based organizations have compliance requirements as well. So security and compliance are key component of what we need to do. And then from then on, okay, that's good, step 0. In step 1, now they go away and do a design, and we want to make sure that there is a security lead/champion that are living through this process and reviewing the security design to make sure, hey, we told you in step 0, these are the requirements from a security and compliance perspective. Have you embedded them in this design process? Perfect. And then you help them along and say, like, okay, next we go to the implementation. What are the security testing that we need to do and make sure that there's proper coverage from security perspective? We don't have any, major vulnerabilities in place, and how do we make sure that that is resolved before you release those products, right? So that's the next step. And then followed by, once you, some of them, like I said, then you follow the methodology of the risk-based approach. If it is high and very high, you mitigate before you go live. If otherwise, you manage and, accept and monitor.
Yeah, I love how you take that kind of approach into the product side, which oftentimes, security people are more interested, and I think we're all guilty of it. And I may exclude you out of this one because you come from the product and R&D side. So for you, the idea is what you lived on for so long, and you know how to speak that language, and you know how to kind of break down those barriers. I can tell you one of my personal challenges has always been, how do I get in on the table when they're talking about the business idea and not, here's everything we're doing, how do we build security around it? And now you've got to start maybe changing different inputs that people have had on a life cycle of, building a product that, could be switched otherwise.
Or worse, right? By the way, we have to release it at this time. Sorry, we don't have time to embed security into this. Like, then
Right.
You're too late into the game, right? And part of it is, I think a lot of it is educational from a CISO perspective. You need to educate your business partners and say why you need to do certain things at certain stages. And this is where the integrated security comes in play. Like, and I call them security champions, security leads, whatever, but they need to be embedded in the business lines, right? You have to be part of the business line, still reporting to the CISO organization, but you might as well have a dotted line relationship with the business line to make sure that they have a trusted security partner they can work with, and they can build their products and solutions based on the advice they get from the security champions.
Let's talk a little bit about security, right? So as a CISO, we all, where do you spend the most time? What part of the business are you spending the most time on when it comes to security?
In Mitel, as a product company, we have kind of 3 distinct organizations. One is the enterprise, which is IT plus all the corporate functions, and then we have the product, essentially the product management and R&D, and then we have the cloud services operations team, which is all the services that we run on the cloud and so on. So my attention is pretty much 1/3 divided all the way, right? And then on top of that, these are the verticals, and then on top of that, we have the horizontal, which is the GRC team, the operations and incident response team, and the architecture team, right? So it is important to have that kind of a setup, in my view, to have the right building blocks and right foundations in place. And security has to be focused, not just on the horizontal, but also on the vertical pillars that you want to support the organization with.
So when you spend your time, you're kind of looking at 3 distinct business groups, which I think is very interesting of how you laid it. You're kind of dedicating a third, and a third. There's often similarities within the different business groups that kind of bring about, I don't want to say repetitive work, but more of a, okay, we kind of address this. How do you streamline security across 3 maybe different business units that may have distinct and special needs?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point you raise up, James, because I think that's why what I did is to take the horizontals, right? So the GRC, for example, would be the one establishing the policies and standards for the organization, or the risk management framework for the organization, or the training and awareness program for the organization. So all the common things will be established by them. And then the verticals, the business line, leads from a security perspective, will be the one helping adopting them. So it's more of a approach where the horizontals set the framework in conjunction with the verticals, and the verticals help execute on these mandates. And then when it goes to security operations, vulnerability management, and incident response, same thing. The vulnerability identification process for both from a corporate perspective and a product perspective will be done by the horizontal team, and then they would be working with the vertical teams and saying, like, okay, these incidents or these vulnerabilities belong to your group, and let's agree on the priorities and so on and so forth. So it's more of a collaborative approach, and I believe that that's the right way, or I shouldn't say the right way, but perhaps the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, I think there's no one framework or one way by which a CISO could copy paste the model across. I think the only model you can copy and paste is if you're the post-breach CISO. So you weren't there when the breach happened. I hired you to rebuild the program. You get all the money you want, and you can pretty much copy paste the model there, right? Because we're going to do all these different things, because recovery is recovery, right? Rebuild is rebuild. A building collapses, right? You're going to clean it out before you start building again. So I think that's the only time where there's duplicity, meaning duplication of a specific work program. But as a CISO, right, like, you've been in multiple organizations, and I kind of want to take you back to getting started at Mitel, kind of your early days in the organization. A lot of times we talk about the first 90 days, the first 100 days as a CISO. What were yours like? What was some of the stuff you looked at the time?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey, so to speak. It was my first foray as a CISO, right? And going back to my initial roots of products, right? So that was an interesting change. From the last 10 years, I've been in the retail industry as in the CISO organization, and then 6.5 years in banking industry. Completely different type of environment, and banking is significantly more regulated, right? But what I had experienced was with the multinational banks, right? So that was a good experience to have. And then when I came over to Mitel in January 2021, it was a different setup, obviously. My mid-sized organization, still extremely global. Mitel has offices around the world, all three continents, really. Like, I guess, North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, really. From that perspective, we have presence in all of them. And it was an interesting challenge to understand the different product lines and different business lines that were in the organization. And it was banks are pretty straightforward. You release applications in certain part of the bank, but primarily focused on data, customer data, and so on and so forth. Whereas in a product company, there's a lot more intellectual property that that exists from a product development, and there's a lot more complexity that comes in from that perspective, right? So my first 90 days was about learning the organization. I'm still learning, by the way. I'm 8 months in. I'm still learning, right? I think I can still say that for another little while. But the first 90 days was about learning the organization, learning what people are doing today. But because of the size of the organization, I would qualify it as a mid-size. The learning phase was much faster. When I wanted to get to a place where, okay, now I understand the organization's setup, organization support model from security. And here is what I've learned from the initial assessment. And this is based on a rough assessment of what the organization's security maturity is. Here's what we need to put in place. From a structure perspective, let's make sure that the foundation is strong. And then let's build on the foundation to hire the right leaders and the right building blocks, if you will. And then let's build on the further ones from there.
So you bring up a very interesting point, with all the different building blocks and kind of getting familiar, and the different size organization obviously differs. I think, in some cases it takes you even a year to understand what's going on and so forth. Now you're 8 months in. If you could go back to, you look back at your first 90, maybe 100 days, what's one thing that you would say, that's a great best practice I'm going to take with me forever? What would that be?
Let me take the moment to answer that. I think what I would say is definitely what I would take forward is, the time I took to understand the initial phase and of understanding the organization, right? And also putting together the right model for the organization. I think it's important that sometimes what happens with the CISO, and especially first-time CISOs, and I am a first-time CISO, is the eagerness to prove your value, kind of shades you from necessarily taking the time to understand the organization, right? So I think that's what I would say I'm proud of from the perspective. Like, I did not rush into my go-forward strategy. I took the time. And then it was well supported by the executive team at Mitel, right? One of the things that I like about the culture is the executive leadership team is fully bought into security and has given me the full freedom to set the security as we need it to be for the organization of our size, with the understanding that obviously, I'm not here to say no to everything. I'm here to make sure that that we can operate the business securely and much more securely than what we used to be.
So you bring up a really interesting point, kind of the first 100 days. Every CISO, myself included, when we walk into a role, we kind of have a strategy in place, because during the interview process, we've taken a bunch of notes and we've kind of gotten an idea. We've heard some of the complaints, and we kind of come with some sort of plan, right? Written or in our heads or in our notes, we kind of have some sort of plan. In taking the time to not prove your value right away and kind of taking the time to learn, did you see your plan change from what you had initially to what you're doing now?
It actually did, James. That's a very good point you make, because like you said, during the interview process, I had some slides prepared and based on my, what I want to do from a CISO perspective, which definitely worked well in the interview process, because, they like to see how you think and how you do it. But I think the key for CISO from an organization to organization is adaptability. You cannot take your existing playbook and say, yeah, this is going to work in a new organization. You can take some components of it, you can take the framework, and you can try to adapt to the new organization based on the organization's setup, needs, and business model, and what their priorities are. And one of the things that I've always believed in and learned through several of my CISO organization roles is that you have to figure out what the business objectives are and try to map your value to the business objectives via the risks that come for the business objectives, right? So you identify the top 5 goals for the organization, and you say, for achieving these goals, what are the cybersecurity risks that associate with it? And then how does a CISO help the organization manage the risk and mitigate the risk to a certain level that, you can never eliminate the risk. If you want to do that, turn off the computers, turn off the internet, and there's no risk.
Right. It's like my favorite meme. If you put your server, right, and they've got a glass on the server and they go, in the event of a cyber attack, break glass and disconnect all wires. Yeah. Right. Like that's a funny meme altogether, but it's really kind of, that's, if you want zero risk, then I suggest you move back to pen and paper.
Yeah.
And, calling your clients on their landline phone from your landline phone, and hope that someone still has a landline somewhere, because that doesn't exist anymore. Most people don't have landlines anymore.
Absolutely. And one thing, I think maybe this is the time to talk about this as well. I'm a huge fan in general of a concept called zero trust or verify then trust, right? And this is truly useful in this day and age because it's all risk focused. But at the same time, the traditional model is, oh, you're inside the 4 walls, I trust you, I let you go roam around the house all wherever you want, right?
Right.
That has proven to be costly, and and you see ransomware attacks every single day, right? And the ransomware attacks have changed from just encrypting your servers and asking for money to taking your data and posting it somewhere if you don't pay the money, right? So the threat actors and threat vectors are evolving. So, I think from a CISO perspective, that's where we have to be ready to be adaptable, and then making sure that we move our strategies and tactics along with what's presented to us.
You talk about zero trust, and let's get into zero trust, because yours truly here has You and I've talked about it before, right? So it's no surprise to either one of us. I've always looked at Zero Trust and said it's a horrible name. Horrible name.
Yep.
You put Zero Trust in front of your board of directors, and man, you start to get what does that mean? What do you mean Zero Trust? Is that how we're going to communicate it to the employees? What kind of reaction do you think we're going to get from people? Do you think other departments are going to really like the idea of Zero Trust? And when you're not trusting people, does that impact our company culture? And so forth. And there's a lot of validation to those claims, but there's also some validation to the strategy, right? And the idea of trust but verify. I trust you, but I'm going to verify that you are who you say you are. That's kind of the idea of MFA. You put in your password, so I trust you, but now I'm really going to verify it's you. Here's the code to the device that only you have access to, allegedly, and enter it, and therefore now you've been granted access. But Zero Trust itself has, in a survey I did on LinkedIn a little while ago, it was a 50-50 between a buzzword and a strategy. How do we fix it?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there, right? I think Zero Trust can be looked at as a buzzword or a strategy, but as we know, it's all about how you communicate whatever you want to do, right? No matter what you do in the organization, what change you want to make, the biggest portion of it is how you communicate and how is it received. So I'm with you on calling it trust but verify or verify then trust, instead of calling it a Zero Trust. But the concept behind this is the same. So it doesn't matter what is it being called, as long as the strategy behind it and the concept behind this are the same, and that's what I think we need to focus on. You and I both know the Zero Trust word came from probably from a well-known industry organization, right? They tend to stick when they come up with names, so that's where the Zero Trust word came from. But I'm with you on calling it trust but verify or verify then trust, so that people don't take it the wrong way and say, yeah, we're going to implement a Zero Trust strategy. What do you mean? You don't trust me anymore?
Yeah, there's I think one of the biggest challenges we've had in security is we're really horrible at marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're really horrible at it. We, when security started and we go back, 10, 15 years ago, right? We were the people of no. We were Chicken Little, the sky's falling, right? No, don't do that. The sky's going to fall. Everything bad that's going to happen can potentially happen at a time where cyber attacks were uncommon, meaning major attacks were uncommon. And if they were common, we didn't know about it because the reporting wasn't necessarily, the required reporting wasn't necessarily there. Now we live in a world where because everything is online and because of social media, you can go through a cyber attack, and before you even announce it, there's people on Reddit going, so-and-so is now offline. We're on a Slack channel. So-and-so is getting a 404, and they're saying it's an IT incident on Twitter. And you're like, oh, they're under a ransomware attack, or they're going through a cyber incident, right? And you don't have that anonymous, kind of like that anonymous I can't talk today. You don't have the kind of the idea to back away, take some time to really regroup. Everything is very, very public today, which is why Zero Trust, I think, to me, was kind of setting us back to the people of no, right? And it's not necessarily about the strategy, like you said, right? It's the marketing issue, but it's also the implementation of Zero Trust within an IT or a network or an infrastructure. There's specific aspects where it's very hard, at least I see it, to do a complete and absolute Zero Trust, right? Because in some cases, it's not functional. How do you see it? Because you're kind of, in our conversation with Zero Trust, you had me convinced, right? You were like, James, listen, this is the strategy. This is why. So I kind of want to take us back to, Zero Trust doesn't fit everyone, but it's a good strategy, when you combine it with, if you look at NIST 800-171, and if you look at the CIS top 20, and you sprinkle Zero Trust on some of those things, and you may have a good viability of some level of security. But how do you address, zero trust essentially in multiple environments where maybe it's not applicable?
Yeah, no, it's a valid point, valid concern. While I'd like to continue to calling it trust, but verify then trust, it's a mouthful. So for the simplicity, we'll keep it zero trust, right?
I want people to know what we're talking about. So if someone tunes in and skips 30 minutes in, they go, well, what's that?
Yeah, exactly. So for that as well, we'll keep it zero trust. But in my view, the zero trust has two major objectives or benefits from it. The number one is reduce the attack surface for the organization. Number two actually is user experience. Increase or enhance the user experience so you can actually connect from anywhere without having to go through the legacy channels of, forced VPN all the time kind of a connection, right? So to me, it's all about marketing, like you said. If you had advertised it like, hey, this increases security, but also enhances your end user experience, you should be able to connect from anywhere in the world, doesn't matter where you're sitting, right? So if you were to design this, architect it correctly, and roll it out correctly, I think those are the major benefits. Now, from a zero trust rollout perspective, there is two components. One is the user side of things. The other one is the system side of things, right? You have to have zero trust on both from a concept and the strategy perspective. From the user side, like you mentioned, the benefits of the end user experience is going to be enhanced. And you have to put in obviously the first step you would do from a zero trust is user authentication. If you are claiming I am James Azar, okay, let's verify it, right? Make sure that it is James Azar. Oh, and then followed by, okay, James Azar is coming from point A. Is he using a organization supplied laptop or a desktop, or is it a personal device, right? And then you make a decision based on security, based on the device that you're connecting from. If it is a personal device, then you have an extra set of things that you may want to do. Consider putting in a containerized environment so that the personal device cannot talk to the environment. So in case your personal device is compromised, it will not enter the organization's resources, right? If it is an organization's device, then you have to check. You move on to the next step, which is to putting in some sort of security controls, virtualized security controls in a cloud environment or a virtual data center, however you want to see it. And then you make a decision on, okay, where do you want to go? Do you want to access a cloud-based application or a private data center-based application? And then what you would then build up is if you want to go to a cloud, you let them go to the cloud. If you want to go to a data center, then you would establish a one-to-one VPN for the application or system they want to access after they go through the step 1 to 3. So in essence, zero trust is not going to kill the VPN concept fully. It is going to replace the full-blown VPN with a per app VPN as you need it, or it's more flexible model from that. And on the system side, just to finish that thought, on the system side, then you would have to make sure that the systems are well protected from a potential lateral movement perspective, in ransomware potentially perspective, and have the required controls from the systems, making sure there is micro segmentation in place if you can, because we all know that network segmentation is a dream that you don't want to ever achieve sometimes because of the cost, right? So I guess that's really the summary of how I would kind of go about it.
So you brought up something very interesting, which is kind of the idea around user authentication. But then when you talk about system authentication, I think that's where I have the biggest challenge with the zero trust, because I can see the zero trust or trust and verify model, right, as something that's very effective when it comes to user identity verification and data access and data management, kind of within a DLP policy, within data classification and data access. So validating, what everyone essentially does per se within a system and what they get access to. From a system perspective, I feel like there's a bigger challenge within the zero trust architecture, right? And part of it has to do with the fact that we live in an AAS world where everything is as a service, right? Your DNS as a service, your SaaS, your infrastructure, your platforms. I can keep going, but there's a bunch of AASs that keep getting invented every single day, including ransomware as a service and crime as a service.
Yeah.
Right. So it seems like we live in a world where our organizations are driven and supported by microservices that is very hard to really completely comprehend it, simply because in the hardware world, right? If we go back to the hardware world and I was to order 300 servers from someone, I would know the entire supply chain of those 300 servers. The parts are sourced here, right? Because that's part of the contract. They're assembled here. They're shipped here. They're delivered here. They're transported here. Then they're delivered to you, Mr. Customer. And I knew that entire supply chain because contractually, if I ordered it and I needed it by day 5, they would explain that, there are different people along the way. There are different routes, and we don't control all of it. But here are how we supply you these servers, Mr. Customer, right? It could be these parts are sourced in India and get to China, or vice versa. It could be that they're sourced in Bangladesh and then they go to India for assembly. Then from India, they're trucked to, like Goa or Chennai. And then from there, they're put on a boat. Then that boat comes around, cuts through the Mediterranean, into the Atlantic Ocean, and into Jersey, Miami, Savannah, you name it, right? And then from there, it's shipped to the customer on a truck or a train or a freight, and it goes into a warehouse and then to you. And that's a supply chain you and I can understand. We understand the risks. We understand the day plus 2-3 days for, different things that we can account for. And it's all visible. And I say that because when it comes to the software platform or infrastructure supply chain, well, we get a shared responsibility model. And the shared responsibility model creates a very difficult part to do a zero trust architecture, because I don't know downstream. I can't go to one of my SaaS providers and say, what repositories are you using in GitHub or GitLab or Docker, right? Or BitLocker or whatever that I need to know about, because if they're disrupted, that's going to disrupt me. You and I don't have that access. Very few people give us that. So how do you look at zero trust in this kind of environment?
That's a very interesting question. So I would look at it slightly differently. To me, the zero trust and the AAS are not necessarily tied to each other, because the world is going towards AAS no matter what.
Right. We're there. It's done. It's over with.
So if you keep the traditional way of doing security, you still have the AAS problem or AAS solution. You can look at it both ways, right? What we have to, I think, as CISOs need to start thinking about is, traditionally, CISOs have depended on, choke points, whether it is proxies, firewalls, and traditionally depended on forcing people to certain choke points and then enforcing security that way. I think what we have to adapt to is going from security forced at choke point to security traveling with the user, right? Flexibility with the user. And that primarily puts us in the position of doing something at the endpoint, which is not a concern these days because most of the endpoints are pretty powerful. And the second piece is, virtualizing security, which is not something that a lot of CISOs are comfortable with, right? When Zscaler came around, for an example, not every CISO wanted to jump on that bandwagon. But, I was one of the ones which actually evaluated them quite significantly at that point in 2015, 2016 timeframe. While there are some challenges, they definitely had the right ideas in place, right? I think, that's where I think we need to start thinking about from a security perspective is start thinking of security needs to travel with the end user rather than the choke point, which again is well supported by the zero trust but verify then trust architecture.
That's such a wonderful answer, and really a very logical one, I must add. So before we're almost at time, but I want to get to one more question, and then I want to go into the CISO Insight round very quick. I like to end everything on a positive note. What's one uplifting thing that you're seeing in cybersecurity that's really keeping you optimistic about our industry?
One uplifting thing, I think it's the community, right? And the community is definitely come together. One of the things I like about security industry in general, and this is very prominent in the financial industry, and I think it'll spread to other places. Security is not seen as a competitive advantage. right? Between the banks, between the organizations. So they come together and they actually help each other out because nobody is fully secure. We know that. The bad guys have more money than we do. That's just the reality of it. So nobody laughs at other person's misery, right? I think that's the part that I'm really happy about. And I think it's spreading from financial industries to non-financial industries the same way. You're starting to see that local security forums where different CISOs come together. I think more and more CISOs are starting to realize we can't be a silo. We have to be business partners, and organizations are realizing that CISO is not somebody down the senior manager, director level. It has to be elevated to a certain higher level. Reporting to the C level, and perhaps sometimes reporting to the CEO or the board. I think those are the improvements that I'm actually thrilled about, and I think security is taken more and more seriously. It is part of a lot of board conversations in many of the organizations, and CISOs get to go to the board, for good or bad reasons, to have the limelight, if you will.
Indeed, I love it. Time for my favorite part of the show. We get to know you, Arvind, a little bit better. So I've got a buzzword graveyard. We bury a bunch of buzzwords, and the topic that we just discussed, zero trust, it's buried in my graveyard. It really is. A lot of people have called it a buzzword. But what's one buzzword you'd bury in the graveyard?
I think I'll go with what I said. Security needs to travel with the user. Like it's a longer sentence, but security travels with the user is my buzzword.
I love it. I love it. What do you think is one technology that will change the way we do security?
I don't want this to happen, but quantum.
Yeah, I will actually completely support you. I think that quantum is going to, but I think quantum, for what it will do to our adversaries, will do so much more to our defense.
It will. I'm still scared about it. So.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. There's a few people to follow around quantum that are very, very smart in security. Chris Lindbergh out of the CDC and Sam Phillips at Wells Fargo. Both of them are doing some great writing and talking a lot about quantum when it comes to the security space. Really, both of those guys are people I really enjoy listening to about it. And they make it, they dumb it down. They make it very simple, which, is really important. What book are you reading right now?
I'm more of an article person. So I'm not a book guy, more of an article, but I follow a lot of cybersecurity articles.
So anything interesting you've read recently?
Actually, nothing I want to point out, but I find it interesting that I'm always interested in knowing about any of the new possible threat vectors and ransomware attacks and things like that. So I was reading about it today. I think I just got the news somewhere that Accenture was hit with a ransomware attack or something. I was just reading.
Yeah, Lockbit hit Accenture and Lockbit's very interesting, by the way, right? I don't want to, we're almost at the end of the show, but for those who don't know, Lockbit put out a bounty and said, sell us your credentials to your company and you'll make millions. And apparently someone very disgruntled at Accenture has taken Lockbit up on their offer. Yeah. What's the last movie you saw? Or something you're streaming at the moment?
I'm thinking, because I've seen a lot of late of Bollywood movies, but not.
So Hollywood. What's a good Bollywood movie? What should we watch? What's a good Bollywood movie?
What's a good Bollywood movie? That's a good. Let me come back to that. Go to the next one.
What's your favorite music?
It's both. I like jazz and Carnatic music from a classical music perspective.
I love it. And what's one thing you took away from SolarWinds?
Enhance your vendor risk assessments.
Yeah.
It's never enough. I think that's one piece. If I can take 10 seconds to expand on this, is
yes, please.
That's one place where I think we have traditionally not done a good job of as CISOs in terms of managing vendor risk, right? And advising organizations. I've been in many organizations, including big banks, where the vendor risk management has been a challenge. And as we know from SolarWinds, that is the main point of attack these days, right? Supply chain, vendor risk. if they can come through our trusted partners and vendors, why would they try us? Like, even if you have a bulletproof mechanism for the bad actors, you do allow access for the vendors and trusted partners. And if they can come through that, I don't think CISOs have taken it as seriously as we should be from that perspective.
Yeah, I think there's when you talk about vendor risk management, it's one of the things where I've been writing a lot about it. I got a series of blogs coming out on vendor risk management that I think are all categorically challenging for many practitioners, which is what I like to call now the shared responsibility model with every vendor. So to me, if a vendor that I work with doesn't have a shared responsibility model within their security piece, I'm likely going to doubt the maturity of their security program. Because if you can't tell me what I'm responsible for and what you're responsible for in the onboarding before we even sign the contract, then I've got an issue with what you think we're doing business together. And I think that's one thing that Amazon and Microsoft have all kind of led the way with that shared responsibility model that's really made life easy for a lot of us practitioners, right?
It has, but I will also say this, right? You may have managed your immediate, third party well, right? But there's fourth parties and fifth parties that often come into play.
Right.
And I think that's where the biggest challenge for us as a vendor risk management program is, how far do you go? How deep do you go?
And it's what do you know? Because if you know it and something happened, then what? What does that really mean? And I think, that's a great, I'm so intellectually enjoying this conversation that I don't want it to end, but I have to. We're out of time. And so I hate it. I want to have you on again, Arvind. And I really want us to deep dive because I think intellectually, I'm really stimulated at the moment with how our conversation went. And that's really fun for me because I love to geek out on security and the back and forth that goes with it, from strategy and so much more, that, when we're done with this podcast, my brain is still going to be going back to stuff we talked about. So I'm eternally grateful that you took an hour out of your busy day to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And the feeling is mutual. I totally enjoyed the conversation, and I'm looking forward to the next time, whenever that is.
Absolutely. Folks, Arvind Raman. Arvind, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
I think everybody can find out from the email address, so arvind.raman@mitel.com, or put it on LinkedIn. You can connect me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Folks, that's it for this week's CISO Talk. We'll have another great episode next week. Make sure to go check out our CyberHub podcast, where the daily practitioner brief, Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. Eastern, live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. Look for the CyberHub podcast channel on all of those networks. And if you're on LinkedIn, you need to follow me, James J. Azar, in order to catch the live broadcast. That's it for us here. Again, see you guys next week. Until then, have a great time and stay cyber safe. Cheers.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.